Welcome, Cindy, to my YouTube channel. I have not done an interview in over a month because I've been absent due to being away. So I just was chatting with Cindy, and I her story is very unique because she wasn't brought up in the organization, and she came into the organization later in life, and she has only been inactive since January of this year. So it's only been 6 months, which is amazing that you are brave enough to come forth and share your story. So without further ado, Cindy, I would love for you to go ahead and share your story with us.
Sure. Well, I'm Cindy Stone, and I was in for 27 years. Um, but my story goes back way, way, way more than that. Before I became a witness, I was Catholic, and I was raised Catholic. It was weird. My growing up years were very different. I was born as a child with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder because my mom drank during her pregnancy with me. And I was born way early, probably about 2 months early, weighing 3 pounds, 4.5 ounces. So you would think that I would hardly have been able to survive that. And that was back in 1971. And so somebody there made sure I survived, and I'm extremely grateful to them because I have a life that few people could ever even think of having. And so, with that, I was fostered for a year, and then my parents adopted me. I had a parent, mom and dad, adopt me with a 4-year-old brother. Um, Growing up was kind of weird. My dad was in the Air Force. My mom was a pharmacist. Uh, from the age of 2 until 5, I lived in Germany. That was a little weird. My brother was always pushing me, hitting me, stuff like that. There was there was sibling rivalry there. And then that was 2 to 5. And then when I turned 5, my dad moved to New Mexico. We moved to New Mexico. So there was like a night and day difference between gloomy, overcast Germany and this bright, hot, sunshiny New Mexico. And then I made a best friend in Germany. Her name was Angela Trobar, and we just hit it off really wonderfully. I was only 6, 7, 8 at that time. Um, just a wonderful memory of playing and having fun. There were some instances that I really, I didn't know what was going on. My dad made some comment about how I wasn't doing good in school. I was, I felt less than for the first time in my life. It was like, ah. And then my brother played upon the point that I was different from the family, how I didn't look different. I looked different, and how I didn't fit in. And that's when I found out I was adopted, and it really bothered me because it was like my mom didn't want me. Why was that? And it really bothered me um, because I felt like if my mom couldn't love me, was I really a lovable person? That really touched a chord deep inside me. I felt worthless. Um, so there was that. But the real problem started when we moved from New Mexico to Alaska. My dad got stationed in Alaska. Well, that's funny. He took that station because I'm Alaskan Native. And so I'm Alaskan Native, and he knew that from the adoption. And so he moved us up to Alaska. And oh, I forgot to tell you, I was born in California. So that's where they were when I was adopted. That's where I was when I was adopted. And so that's why there was all that moving. But Anyway, going back to Alaska, Alaska is the most beautiful place in the whole world. There's nothing like it. But it was very isolating, especially to my mom, to move out of the lower 48 is what we call it, is kind of hard because you have no way to get to your family except by plane. You know, plane tickets are expensive. It's hard to fly everyone down there, you know. So my mom felt extremely isolated. She started to have problems. I didn't know what they were, but my parents were fighting more and more. I was their go-between, which is really hard for an 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid. I didn't know what was going on, but my parents would fight, and my mom would be crying, and she'd be like, go talk to your dad. And I'd be like, okay, I go talk to my dad to see if I could calm him down or whatever. It was a really messed up situation. My brother was he and I had problems with the whole situation. But when I was 10, my aunt and uncle came to visit, and it was more of the same craziness going on. But I remember my aunt took me away from my parents fighting, which was like the first time anyone had ever done that. Made me realize, hey, maybe I'm not supposed to be in the middle of their mess. But that was the first and only time I'd ever felt like that. Maybe I wasn't supposed to do that. But when I was 11, mom went into the hospital. Well, I didn't know why. See, when I was growing up, my dad would always say children are to be seen and not heard. That was the maxim growing up. Children are to be seen and not heard. And so you didn't ask questions. And so one day I came home, my dad was there. He said, your mom's in the hospital. Okay. Is she sick? What's going on? But these are all questions in my head, but you're not allowed to talk, so you don't ask questions. Well, we visited her on the weekend, and she looked sick. She was thin, she was pale, she didn't look well. But there was no, explanation. You just visited her, then you left. And she didn't come home. And you're like, what is going on? But it's all questions that you have in your head. Well, my brother, 15, 16 years old, had his driver's license, his permit, his license, his friends. He would go out in the evenings. My dad and I would be alone. Well, dad would tuck me in, and one night he stayed in my bed and we talked, and he ended up sexually abusing me, which was really sad. And that continued on for the next about year. And over and over and over again. I wouldn't say every other night, every third night, maybe. So about 100 times in the course of a year. Very difficult to deal with. And with that, that's another level of trauma to add to the physical, mental, and emotional abuse I was dealing with. So I had all of it: physical, mental, emotional, and sexual abuse. It was very traumatic growing up in such a dysfunctional family, but I managed to survive. My teenage years were completely crazy. I did everything my parents ever told me not to do. Don't use drugs, don't smoke, don't go out and party, don't, whatever they tell you not to do, you do. And somehow I managed to escape my teenage years without having too many problems. But yeah, I did everything they ever told me not to do, I did. And I paid for it, believe me. But when I was 21, when I was 21, I met my future husband, and we were dating, and not even very long, and I got pregnant. And I was scared, like, because he had said he wanted kids. He was 10 years older than me, but he had said he wanted kids, but I was still like, there's a big difference between saying you want kids and actually having a baby on the way. So I was so scared to tell him. And so I told him, and he was thrilled, just thrilled. And so we got ready to have the baby. We moved in together, had the baby, got married in that order. I wasn't going to be a pregnant bride. And then we lived the life for, we had the baby, we got married, we moved to Kentucky, and which is where he was from. And we lived down there for about 5 years, raising our son. While we lived there, we lived in Greenup, Kentucky, which is it's a big county, but a little city. And then from Greenup, we moved to Carlisle. When our son was 15 months old, we moved to a small town called Carlisle and lived there for a couple of years. And then we moved to Lexington. Now, Lexington is the big horse capital of the world, actually. And so we lived in Lexington, and that's where I came in to Jehovah's Witnesses. Someone knocked on my door, and I had been raised Catholic, of course, and they asked, what do you think happens when you die? And I was like, heaven, hell, purgatory, I don't know. And she answered me, she said, well, it's right here in the Bible at Ecclesiastes 9:5. She rattles that off. My jaw hits the ground because I'd never heard that before. And I was like, whoa, that's in the Bible? I invited her in. I fired off question after question because the previous year, my husband had told me to look for my biological mom for our son. Well, we found out that she had died when I was 11. And I did not want to look for her, knowing that my mom had been drinking during her pregnancy. I knew she was probably an alcoholic, but he kind of forced me into it. And when I started looking, I began to really hope that I could find her, really hope that we could have a good relationship. I had hope and expectation. Well, when I found out she had died, that crushed me. And I started to spiral into a depression. So when the witnesses came along and told me, there's a hope that you could see your mom again, whoosh, that was like, oh, wow, this is great. I've got to know more about this, especially from that first question, what do you think happens when you die? And then there's the hope of seeing your loved one again. And so the hope really hit me so hard. And I went after the witnesses just like that. And I was a full-on witness. In 6 months, I got baptized. And I went into the witnesses probably November. By December, I was attending meetings. I got baptized June 22nd, 1996, in front of 10,000 people in Freedom Hall in Louisville, Kentucky. And I just went with it. But this was not to come without problems, because I couldn't keep my mouth shut, of course. I was one of those talky witnesses. And the first person I talked to was my husband. And the more I talked, the angrier he got. See, he was an ex-Marine. And he really did not want me to have anything to do with that. But I couldn't stop talking. And like I said, the more I talked, the angrier he got. So when I told him I was doing field service after I became an unbaptized publisher, I will never forget what he said. He said, I don't want my wife to go around bothering people. Whoa. And I was like, okay. And I kind of like cut it back some after that. I was like, okay, we're not gonna have any more of these outbursts. And so, because I didn't, I was like, that's enough. And so, I learned to be more circumspect. And I didn't tell him when I got baptized because I didn't want the fight. So when I did finally tell him I got baptized, there was a huge fight. And so that just, it didn't do anything for our marriage. But we did stay married for 6 years after the fight about the baptism. He really tried to put up with the witnesses for my sake. He really did care, but I was so into the witnesses. I attended every meeting, I read the Bible. I mean, you end up reading the Bible anyway at the meetings. But in 2001, I decided to read the Bible for the first time all the way through, in a year like we're supposed to. Well, I did that one time, and then I thought I could do that again. I did it a second time. I've read the Bible over 25 times. And I was like, I just never stopped. And from 2001 to 2022, I read it over 22 times, plus the times I read it at the congregation. So it was over 25 times. And I was like, so I was really, really into it. And so I did the conventions. I was always excited about the conventions, and everything was so new and exciting and fun. I mean, I loved the get-togethers. The friends were so interesting, and everything was just great. And the only thing was my family. I couldn't get my family interested. And I tried, believe me, I tried. And I prayed. I put my heart into my prayers, begging Jehovah if only I could get my husband interested. I did everything I thought to do. I tried to be a good wife. I tried to humble myself. I tried so hard. And, well, I thought I did. But, we make mistakes. We do. But at the end, towards the end of the marriage, it just got to the point where we couldn't stand each other anymore. And so he decided to divorce me. And it was like, I couldn't stay in it either. Not with him opposing everything I ever did. Everything I ever wanted in my life, he hated. And so we divorced. My son was 9 and my daughter was 3. And so we divorced, and he got the kids because he told me, he said, if you do not agree to give me the kids, you will never see them again. And I knew he could do it. I knew that he could just up and disappear because he'd had experience with that in his own family. And so I was like, okay, take the kids, as long as I get visitation, we will be fine. And so that's what we did for the next years, having the kids grow up like that. It was hard, but we made it work. Well, my kids grew up and moved out of the house. They moved out of the house and grew up. And so in 2022, my daughter was living with me, She was 23, and one day in November, I came home from a meeting. It was a Sunday afternoon meeting, Sunday morning meeting, so it was Sunday afternoon. And I said, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm in an organization I can trust." And instantly her face changed, just fury. She was so mad. And I didn't understand why. She said, "Are you really?" And I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" And she said, what is an apostate, Mom? What's an apostate?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know exactly. It's someone that doesn't love Jehovah." And so I looked it up in the reasoning book and showed her. She said, "That's not what an apostate is, Mom." And she grabs my phone and looks up Jehovah's Witnesses and child abuse. Oh my goodness. I looked through, and what I was seeing stunned me. Child sexual abuse, the cases, the stories. I was frozen. It felt like someone punched me in the gut. I could not believe what I was reading. Actual people who had been sexually abused by their Jehovah's Witness parents, by the elders. I was so stunned. And right then and there, I was PIMO. I cut it off right then and there. I never went to another service meeting. I never went out in service after that. I was done. I stopped supporting the congregation right then and there. There was no way there was absolutely no way that I could continue being a witness. I mean, I had to continue for about 6 more weeks, but I was like, no, never again will I consider myself to be a witness. And so I did. I made it through, and in January I got out. I stopped going to meetings, and of course they tried to love bomb me back inside. They were all like, "But we love you, we miss you, you can't leave us." And I'm like, "Oh yes, I can, because I know." And well, fast forward to about June 1st, I wrote my letter of disassociation, because I realized with some of the stuff that I was doing and not doing, that they could disfellowship me, and I didn't want them to disfellowship me. I wanted to be the one to make the decision. I wanted to be the one that walked away. So I turned in my letter of disassociation, and probably by mid-June, I was disassociated. And I've never done anything better than to get myself out of that cult.
Cindy, your story gave me so many goosebumps. Wow. The fact that you just turned in your letter a month ago, and I'm so curious, when your daughter showed you the information regarding the child sex abuse, were there any indications that I shouldn't look at this, or like anything inside of you that said I shouldn't look at this, or I need to do my own research, or I need to talk to the elders? Was there any like internal dialogue that you had when you saw that your daughter was
Not a
especially
single one. Not a single one. I knew what I was looking at was the
wow,
truth,
wow.
and I knew that they had been lying to me.
Mm,
I read one story about a boy who had been molested by another elder in the congregation. They showed a picture, and I was like, oh my goodness, there was nothing that they could say that would turn my attention away from that. It was nothing, because he used his real name, he used his real face, he used his whole story, and I knew from then on that no, never. There was no doubt in my mind that they were not lying. There was no doubt in my mind that they were telling the absolute truth, and that Watchtower had been lying to me all along.
I'm so curious too, like, how did your daughter even come across that information? I know you said she had only been living with you a couple months prior.
She had been living with me for about 6 months, and she had found out a year prior that about child abuse within Jehovah's Witnesses, but she was scared to tell me because she knew about my past, and she was terrified that I would be suicidal or something, because I'd spent so many years in, and because of my own child sexual abuse, what was this going to do to me?
Mhm.
And I remember that day, we couldn't even talk about it that day. I just couldn't even cope with anything that day. But the following Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, we sat down and we went over story after story after story, because it wasn't just one. It was in US News and World Reports. It was in the New York Times. It was in the Australia Royal Commission. The BBC, it was everywhere. And I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, this is beyond bad. This is horrid. And I knew that, I had to keep the lid on. I had to act, but I knew that this was the end. This was the absolute end. I would never go back to being a witness.
Oh, I can only imagine. What is your relationship like with your daughter now that that has happened?
It's great. It's wonderful,
Mhm.
because, she's proud of me for leaving. She's absolutely thrilled that I have left the cult, and we're very close. And my son too. My son and I are really close now, because I'm not preaching at them anymore. We're a close family now. We really get each other. We're on the same level, Whereas before, I was up here trying to preach to them and they were like, Mom, shut up. And now it's like we're on the same level, and it's so great.
That's beautiful.
And yeah.
And your friendships, I mean, you were in the organization for a while.
Yeah, I had friends from 27 years, and some of them I had to just break off and let go. And it hurt. It really did, because I cared about them. But at the same time, I know, you know, it's like it's something that they have to do. It's something, you know, being disassociated is something that I had to do for me. But if they want to, they can find me when they're ready. They can come to me when they're ready. But that's how it has to be, because they're the ones that don't want to come out of the organization. I would welcome anybody, to come talk to me. But don't, I'm not going to go to you as a witness and say anything that I've said, because I know what your reaction is going to be. But if you're interested in anything I've said, come to me, because everything I've said is the truth.
I think your story speaks so clearly, and like I keep on saying, I mean, I've interviewed people too that the sex abuse and all the information that's out there woke people up. So, but I know that there's some people that tried to show that to their relatives and they
Yeah.
got turned off. And so
Yeah,
I'm
exactly,
so glad
exactly.
you
You
had.
can't force the truth on anyone. I
No.
think that is a major problem with Jehovah's Witnesses because they go out and try to force their beliefs on everyone.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
know, I never felt comfortable doing the witnessing work. For 27 years, I did it, and I never felt comfortable with it. It always felt wrong to me. I hated it, actually. I mean, I loved it because it was what I thought I was supposed to do, but I never really felt comfortable with it.
Wow. Oh, well, Cindy, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's such a powerful story. I feel honored to have heard it, and it goes into so many different directions. Um, is there anything you feel like you missed or you wanted to add to this interview?
Well, yeah. I would say anybody out there who wants to share their story, come forward. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to speak up, to speak out, to tell your story, because everybody has a story. Everybody. You know, don't be afraid to tell your truth. Don't be afraid. You know, there's nothing out there that's going to hurt you for speaking up and telling your story. It can only make you stronger.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm always looking for more people to interview, and everyone's story is so diverse, and I know that one story can influence somebody else and another story can influence a different person. So I think it's a beautiful thing to add to this interview. Well, again, Cindy, thank you so much for coming forth and being so vulnerable and sharing all aspects of your life and your story. So I will leave details if you want to contact Cindy in the description. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's video is just going to be a life update of myself. I have just been on this crazy amazing journey since leaving the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and today is just kind of a life update. The last time I did one was about a year ago, so I want to keep you guys up to date with my life. So thank you so much for subscribing to my channel, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I would really appreciate it if you do so. It just encourages me to make more content for you guys. I hope you've been enjoying all the interviews that I've been doing. I think I'm almost at 50 interviews right now, which is wild to me. I did not know that when I first started it's going to turn into all these interviews, and I've just been having so much fun creating them, and I know that they're making a big impact in the ex-Jehovah's Witness community. I've always had a strong passion to help people, and directly after high school, I went to school to be a massage therapist. And I did that for a couple years. That was back in 1999 is when I went to massage school. And then in 2013, I became a certified wellness coach because I love fitness, I love eating healthy, and it's been part of my life since I was 16 is when I started working out. So it's just been something that I've also been passionate about. And the universe was showing me this direction of helping people in a much deeper way. And I also was working on myself. That's when I decided I no longer wanted to be a Jehovah's Witness, and all of my trauma had surfaced. I had been through physical abuse, sexual abuse, and then the religious trauma from the Jehovah's Witnesses, along with neglect and abandonment from my parents and the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I had lots of trauma I knew I needed to work with, and my healing journey began in 2013. I went on then to become a certified trauma-informed life and wellness coach. I am trained in a method by Dr. Gabor Mate called Compassionate Inquiry. It's a psychosomatic approach to therapy where I help people I bring people into their bodies and help them feel their emotions. And I work very similar to a therapist. My work is through Zoom, hour-long calls, and I usually take clients once per week. I also hold retreats in Costa Rica. And if you haven't heard my life story, I will do a small recap.
So I was born in Baghdad, Iraq. My family moved to the Detroit area of Michigan when I was 1.5, and that's where I was a Jehovah's Witness. I lived there until the age of 32. I was married to another Jehovah's Witness for almost 8 years. After I got divorced, I moved to Edgewater, Illinois, which is part of Chicago. I lived there for 1 year and 2 months. December 26, 2013, I packed up and then moved again to Southern California. I didn't know anyone in Chicago. The reason why I moved from Michigan to Chicago, it was just another big city, and I wanted to be surrounded by people. I was going through the process of being disfellowshipped, and I just really wanted to be around a lot of people, and I knew that Chicago was a good place and it wasn't too far away from home, so it was kind of still safe, and I was going to the meeting still unsure of where my stance was, trying to get reinstated. Again, you can watch my whole story a couple years ago when I posted it. Anyways, when I was done living in Chicago, I moved to Southern California. I lived in Orange County for 2 years, in Huntington Beach, and then I lived in Los Angeles, in West Hollywood for 5 years with my second husband. We ended up getting married in 2014 when I was still living in Orange County. And then in December 2020, in the heart of the pandemic, we packed up and moved again. My husband really wanted to be close to his family. My husband is half Swedish, half Spanish, and his whole family lives here in Stockholm. So he was like, yeah, we should move. And I had been here so many times, and I loved Sweden. His family is my favorite. They're such good people. And they showed me unconditional love from the moment that they met me. We've been married now for almost 9 years. June will be our 9-year wedding anniversary, which is kind of crazy to me. But then in December 2020, we moved out of the US, sold about 80% of our stuff. We left the US with 2 suitcases and 2 backpacks. So in Christmas of 2020, we spent it here in Sweden with his family. And then in January, we just started traveling. We were both working online at the time. We lived in a month in Marbella, Spain with my husband's friend. Then we lived in Costa Rica for 3 months. And then we lived in Mexico for a month. I have a friend that lives in Cancun, so we stayed at her place for a month. And we stayed in Tamarindo in Costa Rica for 3 months because there was like a small Swedish community there of people that we knew from beforehand. That's why we chose that specific area. Loved Costa Rica. It was absolutely amazing. So then going back to 2021 is, I think, the last time I did a life update. I think I did like a video of me in Sweden. I lived in 8 months in Sweden. So from May of 2021 to January 15 of 2022, I lived here in Sweden, in Stockholm, like a community here in Stockholm, and just loved it. The winters here are brutal, dark, cold, dry. My skin hates it, but I love the people here, so it made everything worth it. I was wanting to start my permanent residency card, so in order to get that started, I had to leave the country. So we went back to Costa Rica because I love the country, and it was like, why not? Why not make it happen? My husband's work was more in person. He is a nutritional coach, a wellness coach, a personal trainer. So his work is more in person here, whereas my work is more online. I do host plant medicine retreats in Costa Rica, but I would say the majority of my work is online. I work very similar to a therapist, so I have 1-hour sessions with my clients. But he was with me for the first 3 months back in Costa Rica. So he was with me from January, I think we arrived in January 16 to in Costa Rica, and he was with me till April 12th in Costa Rica. So like I said, I traveled 19 times around Costa Rica. I started in San Jose, went to the Caribbean side where he was with me still, was in Manzanillo, was in a town called Cocles, and he was with me. So then after that, he went back here to Sweden, and I stayed by myself for 8.5 months, traveling around the country and just working on the last bit of my trauma by myself. I love my husband, and I was able to really heal a lot of my deep wounds because I was in a safe relationship, and he has been my rock and has given me the space to really self-reflect, and has been really good at helping me with my communication skills. We heal in healthy relationships, so I thank him so much for allowing me to be that safe space to so I can heal. I'm sorry, I can't even speak right now. But I still knew I had a very big abandonment wound, which was not only being abandoned by the Jehovah's Witnesses when I got disfellowship, which was a huge abandonment, but I was never seen or been with emotionally by my parents. So I was emotionally neglected as a child, and then physically neglected by the Jehovah's Witnesses, the only community I ever knew, when I was 32, around my 32nd birthday. So that was 11 and a half years ago. So going back to my story, so my husband went back to Sweden. This was April of 2022. That is when I think I did the last update of my life here on YouTube. Yeah, so if you're still with me, thank you so much for following along. Like I said, I traveled all over, and then in December 20th, 2022, I came back here to Sweden, and I have been back here since then. And now we are coming to the end of May, and I live again in the Stockholm area. I live in a really beautiful town. Outside, I just see woods and trees. It's a really, really great place. And I'm gonna be here until September. I'll leave for 3 months, go back to Costa Rica, host my retreats. I do have some short travels here and there. I'm actually going tomorrow to Denmark to be with a client. I don't know what else the future will hold for me this summer. I do plan on going to a 10-day Vipassana next week, which I'm so scared of. Like, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. So a 10-day Vipassana is a silent retreat where you meditate for hours a day. There's no phones, no talking, no journals, no books. So it's just you and you. And yeah, for 10 days, that is going to be something. I'll do a video, I'll do a vlog talking about it later. I know I'm going to be in a really a vulnerable and interesting space when it's all done and over with. But yeah, I think it's a lot of stuff for me to self-reflect on. Yeah, I'm constantly putting myself in really uncomfortable situations, and fear is something that I have befriended. And in order for me to be in the places I want to be in my life, I know that I have to be friends with fear. And fear is nothing to actually fear. Fear just means that I'm actually interested in something. And I walked in the face of fear, and I've held hands with it, and I've done so much being afraid and still doing the things that I want to do. So yeah, this is an update of my life. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching, and I hope that my story inspires you, and if it does, you have already made me happy. So yeah, I've used getting disfellowshipped as the driving factor to make my life super epic. And these interviews that I do, my big why behind it is I know that there is this huge amount of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses that need to see people are in a good space in their life. And I was like, why not bring people's story together that are in a good place, that the people that are afraid of leaving the organization can watch and learn from them and maybe get inspired. Who knows? So yeah, anyways, I'm not gonna make this video any longer. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys later.